So, Stefan, when I was a kid, that was the name of this game. It's the 111th fixture between Bayern Munich and Stuttgart, and we used to call it the Südschlager, or the Southern Hit. Schlager in German is the hit music, awful stuff. If you really want to torture someone, put that on.
Tell me about it. Don't let anyone from Cologne let you hear you say that. They swear by it. Even though it's a good way to run a party, in my opinion.
I've been on many parties where my parents took me where they played that stuff up and down. It's a scar that I've taken from my childhood to this present day.
I was actually funny enough, last time I was in Leverkusen, I was staying in Leverkusen, but I went through to Cologne with a colleague because he'd never been to Cologne before, and Carnival was on. So I said, right, okay, I'll take you through. We can go for a few drinks. And we're sitting in this bar, which is obviously just rammed full of drunk people from Cologne, because that's what they do during Carnival. And the Schlager music was playing, and I'd only had like one or two beers, so I was relatively sober, and I was just kind of like that sober guy at a drunk college party who's just kind of looking around thinking, what's going on here? And the conclusion I came to about Schlager music was that it's basically the kind of like music you would hear at a kid's birthday party, but for adults, like shoulders, knees and toes. It's like that, but for adults. It's like the adult version of music, because everyone sings it, they all do stupid dances, and it's like, and it's so, I hate it. It's probably the one thing I hated most about living outside Cologne when I lived there.
Yeah.
So anyway, sorry, you've really triggered me there, I'm afraid, with that with that reference.
I'm glad I did, because it got me laughing. And also, it's probably like you probably were at a party, and the only time the Schlager music was interrupted was for Sweet Caroline.
Put a bullet in my head.
The world's worst song, and thankfully banned from the Vancouver Canucks Rogers Arena, which it should be. It should be banned from every sporting venue on the planet. That is my take. It's a hill I'm dying on. But all of this, let's get back to the actual game, the Südschlager. The 111th Südschlager, or Southern Hit, between Bayern Munich and Stuttgart. And for the first time in like maybe like good 15, 16 years, it actually does feel like a proper derby, Stefan. Because last year, Stuttgart did something that hasn't happened in Germany in a long, long time. Not only did Bayern not win the Bundesliga title, but they also finished third. And that was because they lost that game against Stuttgart, in Stuttgart. And it really feels like, although Stuttgart, and I mentioned this earlier, didn't have the best start to the season, it really feels like they are back as a force in German football. The way that they're playing football, the players that they have to their disposal, and it does give me the sense that they can go to Munich and get something there.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's obviously going to be a huge test, but we just talked about Frankfurt, who, were able to kind of go toe-to-toe with Bayern. And we've talked a lot about Bayern in recent weeks, about how they have this run of really difficult games and how they will do in them. And it's been so far, mixed results, quite literally. And Stuttgart, obviously, huge test here. I'm really intrigued by Stuttgart this season, because in many ways they've improved a lot, but in many ways I think they have maybe taken a step backwards. And I probably think you could boil it down to the simple fact that in an attacking sense, they're still doing very well, but in a defensive sense, they're obviously having to rebuild because they've lost a number of players. They brought a number of players in, and Hoeneß just simply needs time to rebuild that defense, and that's understandable. But for example, last season, they were scoring 2.29 goals per game and conceding 1.15. But this season, they're scoring 2.5 goals per game, so an increase, but also conceding 1.83. So basically, they've increased their goals scored per game by, I don't know, like 10%. But they've almost doubled the amount of goals they're conceding per game. And I think that is kind of borne out when you look at the performances. And in a weird kind of way, it seems to be impacting the most when they play quote-unquote lesser teams. They obviously lost to Freiburg. They've dropped points to Mainz, to Wolfsburg, to Hoffenheim. These kind of mid-table clubs who are decent teams, but you would expect this Stuttgart team to beat them. But because they've kind of got that defensive frailty, they seem quite capable of just kind of conceding a goal really at any point. The weird thing is that then when they go up against good teams, they actually seem to do better. And I think that's probably just because they've obviously maybe, I don't know if it's conscious or unconscious or if it's down to Sebastian Hoeneß's kind of tactics. But he seems to, they just kind of have this tendency of when they play these teams in these big games, they just say, well, if we can't defend, we might as well just go toe-to-toe with these teams. They did that against Borussia Dortmund, but they actually thumped them 5-1. Although they lost 3-1 to Real Madrid, it was a game that they could have very, very easily won. I know it seems bizarre to say because they lost by 2 goals, but it really was a match in which I thought they were really unfortunate not to take 3 points from, and or at least a point rather. And then of course we saw at the very start of the season in the Super Cup against Leverkusen, even though they went a man down, they kind of gave a good account of themselves. So they're this weird team that are actually bizarrely better set up to play big teams because they just going to go for it. They accentuate their positives. They make sure they attack, and obviously in attack they've got 2 great players, and not only Undav, who's obviously in the form of his life, but also Demirovic, who is just having the most remarkable and impressive start to life at Stuttgart. He looks like he's been playing there for 5 years, and purpose-built player for Demirovic, for Sebastian Hoeneß, and that's without even touching on, as you said, Leveling, who I think I saw Sebastian Hoeneß saying that he basically showed up to team training this week with a beaming smile on his face because of his goal for Germany. So that all suggests to me that this is going to be a real kind of barnstormer. It's going to be a real box-to-box game. There's going to be goals. And I'm not entirely sure that's what Bayern Munich fans will want. I think they'd probably prefer a kind of stoic defensive team to play right now that they can kind of pin back and try to unlock over the course of 90 minutes rather than a team with some real teeth and some real attacking intent, because that's obviously what Frankfurt had and it didn't go tremendously well for them. So yeah, I think this is going to be a really interesting game, and I'm really intrigued to see how Stuttgart do, because so far this season they've actually performed better in these big games.
Yeah, I mean, these are the 2 teams with the most possession on average in the Bundesliga. Bayern Munich with 65% and Stuttgart with 60% on average. So, I mean, that gives you some indication of how this would go, right? Both teams will want to have the ball. And I think, too, we've seen in the last 18 months or so that if you go to Munich and you are just sitting back and hope for the best, that doesn't always work. You know, the teams that I'm not saying don't be defensive, because that's Frankfurt did do that, but Frankfurt, you know, at the end of the day only got a point against Bayern Munich because, you know, they scored 3 goals. You got to score goals against them. You know, that's how it's gonna go, because the Bayern Munich attack is so lethal. Whether it's Kane, Olise, Musiala, Gnabry is in excellent form at the moment. You know, he's one of the big winners in the early stages of the Kompany regime. And I think that is something that you really have to take into account for. If you want to beat this team, you got to play with them. You got to take it to them, and you got to really go at Bayern Munich's defense, which is so full of holes, right? And so defensively awkward in so many ways still. And Kompany hasn't really fixed that at all. So, you know, I think actually there's a lot of Stuttgart players that are purpose-built to do exactly that. Leveling is one that comes to mind. I thought actually him and Gnabry were 2 of the best players for Germany against the Netherlands. Leveling was outstanding. You know, he should have had 2 goals, not just the 1. And the fact that his goal in the second minute was disallowed, only for him to then smash home. I mean, he smashed that home at the Allianz Arena. The winner against the Netherlands is something pretty significant. And I think that is something that he can take, and the confidence he can take to Bayern, and it will make this for a really interesting match. Stefan, you mentioned the defense of Stuttgart, and I think you're really onto something there. I look at Stuttgart's attack now, and I look at their projected lineup, right? And you see Milo there, you see Undav there, you see Leveling there, and then Demirovic up front. I mean, that's class. That's a really good attack. Then behind that, you have Karasor and Stiller. They were there last year. Stiller and Pavlovic were fantastic for Germany together, right? Stiller is growing and growing. And then you go into defense, and there's Wagnermann there. Yeah, he was there last year. And then there's Mittelstadt there. He was there last year. And then there comes the kicker, right? Rold and Chabot as center backs. Those are the projected center backs. By the way, I think both of them are excellent. But the Hoeneß style of football is just so different, right? Like with the amount of possession that you have to play very proactive. Think, teaching that system of football to defenders is hard. And I think they're conceding a lot of goals because you essentially have two of your core players in your defense learning how to play football again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you could actually kind of turn that around to the Bayern team as well, actually, in a weird sense, because you could look at their defense and say, because of the fact that they obviously moved on to Ligt in the summer, whether through choice or just through circumstance, Kompany is more or less committed to sticking with Upamecano and Kim Min-jae through thick and thin. And, they'll play the weekend. And I saw an interesting clip, actually. Bayern posted a social media video this week of training. And it was a video of Kim doing something. He was on camera and he ran off camera. Whatever he did off camera in training was to the complete delight of Kompany, who, in the clips going, yes, Kim, fantastic, and yeah, that's fine, all well and good. But I do kind of wonder if that was kind of strategically placed, because if there are any serious question marks over this Bayern team, over and above the fitness of Harry Kane, it is that defence, and it is those two in particular, I think, that Kompany has to really get right this season. And, in the last kind of couple of games for the international break, he just did not do that. I don't think they played very well against Frankfurt at all. I don't think they played very well against Aston Villa at all. And they're going to come up against two really informed strikers in Demirovic and Undav, and a very, very pacey winger in Leveling. So, the Bayern back line's probably going to be Davies, Kim, Upamecano, and then Guerrero at right back, because obviously injuries to Sasha Boy and Stanisic. And that in itself is going to be really interesting. Maybe Conrad Leimer might be placed in there instead of Guerrero. We don't know, but
yeah,
that's going to be really interesting as well, I think, because like Stuttgart, who have a very young defense, who are trying to, build themselves into something, and in the meantime, Hoeneß is just kind of hoping his forward line can kind of outscore the goals that the defense concede. It's actually quite similar to what Bayern Munich are kind of stuck with right now, where in these big games, teams do seem to be singling out Upamecano and Kim, and there's just no other way about it, really. Bayern don't really have any other way that they can play. So we're going to see Kim and Upamecano, we're going to see them be very aggressive, we're going to see them basically be on the front foot against Undav in particular, and it'll be interesting to see if they can get the better of them or if they'll struggle. And I think that's where the game might be made or broken for Bayern.
Yeah, no, and just to add to that, there's some reports that Hiroki Ito could be making the bench for Bayern Munich for the first time. If you're Bayern Munich fans, you're praying for the moment that he and Stanisic come back, I think, because I think they will go a long way stabilizing that defense. If I am Alphonso Davies, I'd be really worried with Ito coming back, because he can play that left side and he might just provide you with a bit more stability there than the Canadian does, But, at the moment, that's not going to be the case. Davies is going to face an informed winger instead. We'll see how that goes, but it's going to be such an intriguing match. Really looking forward to seeing it on Saturday. So I guess we can all tune in. Stefan, I guess this is also a good point to remind people that they can comment underneath this and let us know what do you think? How is this big Südschlager going to end on Saturday evening? I suspect a high-scoring draw. What do you think?
In this game in particular, good question. I think both teams will score. And yeah, I'm not quite prepared to say Stuttgart will win this one.
Uh,
I'm actually going to go for 3-2 win for Bayern here, I think.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah,
All right.
by no means comfortable, but I think at this point, Kompany will happily take the 3 points and be done with it.
Well, as you said, like, what is it? Civilization is only 3 meals away from utter chaos. Well, Bayern Munich had 3 games without a win, so I don't even want to know what happens if they don't win this one. It's going to be entertaining for the rest of us. So, yeah, it should make for a really great weekend.